Well, hello out there, and welcome to another edition of the Poets Corner. I always say the same thing, and I apologize, but it's always true that I feel incredibly lucky to have a really special person on the air with us today, Steve Glines. Steve is a Littleton resident since 2002, and he's a very prolific writer. In fact, he writes for a living as a public relations writer.
Right.
And he's got books published, he's got poetry published. He is involved with a group of writers called the Bagel Bards, and they publish regular anthologies. We're going to hear a little bit about them later. And he's written even a travel book called 7 Days in Fiji, which we're hoping to read an excerpt from in a little bit. A very wonderful, not just an incredible little guide for somebody wanting to go to Fiji, but has such great human interest and funny stories and history, just chock full of good stuff. So that's the kind of writer that Steve is. He brings in, I would say, both humor and presence and just brings you right into the moment with a lot of his writing. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you.
We usually try to start with how you got started writing as a young person.
Well, writing's a family business. My mother was a journalist, and my grandfather was a writer. He wrote about 25 books. And it was expected that we all knew how to write. Not that necessarily we make a living at it, but it's something we've always done. I got my first piece published in the Hartford Current, and when I was, I think, 13.
Wow.
So, another 10 years before I wrote anything else, but that was, it was fun. I had to prove that I could do it.
Yeah, so it's a real family legacy,
yeah,
the writing.
Yeah. I remember telling my mom, announcing that I was going to be a writer when I was probably 14 or 15, and she said, well, you come by it naturally. You come from a long line of failed and petty literati. I haven't decided which side of the fence I fall on yet.
Of the petty literati?
Petty, failed or petty.
Oh, well, I would hardly call you failed. I would love to open with a poem that you read to me when we were talking earlier, Hands on the Home Keys in Meditation. Before you read that, I wanted to give you a reflection from Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet, because I felt like what he said captured very much the spirit of your writing as an inner calling. It's both a family legacy and obviously a calling.
Right.
And I think you wrote that poetry was fun for you.
It is.
And that prose is as natural to you as it is for people to go out and play a game of golf, or it's just something you always do.
Right. It becomes an obsession after a while.
That's the inner calling.
Yeah.
So here is just a small quote from Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet. Poetry is a deep inner calling in man. From it came liturgy, the psalms, and also the content of religions. The poet confronted nature's phenomena, and in the early ages called himself a priest to safeguard his vocation. Today's social poet is still a member of the order of priests. In the old days, he made his pact with the darkness, and now he must interpret the light. And so this interpreting the light or bringing fun into the darkness is, I think, a concern of a lot of writers.
Okay, well, it's funny because one of the things that's interesting about being a writer is that it's anyone who can tell a story can be a writer. We all know people who have excellent mind-mouth coordination and use it frequently. It's just simply mind-hand coordination. You have to type. And we get to a point that I feel blessed when I get to that point where I don't even know what I'm typing. It's just the words come and I just take dictation. And to try to express that feeling is what the poem that you want me to read is about.
Great.
It's called Hands on the Home Keys in Meditation. This is a prose poem, I should say. I should warn everybody.
And just tell our audience a little bit, what is the distinction that you would make between prose and poetry? Or are they
Well, I've always had a problem with the distinction between a poet and a writer.
Yeah.
I consider myself a writer more than a poet. A poet is really a title that's bestowed upon people from outside. It's not really, I don't consider myself a poet. The difference between Poetry is just a short form of prose as far as I'm concerned. If it's short enough, it's a poem. If it's longer, it's a short story. So anyway, so this is a short story that is masquerading as a poem.
Okay.
It's called Hands on the Home Keys in Meditation. Hands on the home keys in meditation. I await a visitation by the muse. This is an old familiar position, and I am comfortable. I look at the back of my hands as I have for decades, and note how the wrinkles of age have grown like little gullies upon an ancient hill. I look upon the hands of an old man, as unrecognizable as the face I shave in the morning. I smile. She is here. She will always come. I stare somewhere beyond the keyboard, hands in soft focus. Madly they work and fly. Fly-scat images, also in soft focus, appear at the upper edges of my vision. I am typing, transcribing words from an ethereal voice, words that will reveal themselves when I look up and dismiss myself from this spell. For now, I enjoy the soothing but undistinguishable voice that drives my hands across the keyboard. Soft and sweet like the caressing touch of a first love, I am enthralled that this voice and these hands will create such beauty. I wish for an eternity, but creation, like procreation, has an end, and I must eventually look up and into the eyes, the face of God. I catch but a fleeting glimpse of a quickly departing muse, off no doubt to pluck the strings or press the keys of another desperate lover. I sit motionless, staring at the work before me in awe. I am satisfied, exhilarated, exhausted. This beauty is not of my doing, though I shall take credit for it. It should have my name, just as the child of another labor does. I look down at my trembling hands, the wrinkled hands of an old man, older for the experience, older for the toil life takes upon those driven to the muse. She is gone now, but she will return. She will return. Faith is a promise we make to ourselves to be at her beck and call. When she returns, these hands will be ready. Hands on the home keys in meditation.
Wow. That really is, to me, a very sacred poem.
Oh, good.
Very
Thank
sacred.
you.
And I love it that your muse had the feminine energy. It was like the sweetness of the lover, and there's such a softness in the feeling of you waiting there to receive. You're becoming the empty vessel to receive whatever it is that wants to come through you.
Yeah, it's a very exhilarating experience when you have an idea of what you want to type, and you just stare and do it. I think a lot of writers who want to be writers think they have writer's block, and they're just not willing to just start typing, to start writing, because the words are there. If they can say it with their mouth, they can say it with their fingers.
So that's a great, that's great advice. Like, just start to move your fingers and just say something.
Yeah.
Is that what you're telling?
Yeah, and sometimes people? You don't know where the story's going. You don't, even if it's if I'm writing press releases or technical papers or something, I don't know how the story's going to unfold. Even a technical paper is a story. You're telling a story. You're crafting an idea, and sometimes you start typing. You have an idea where you want to end up, but you don't know how you're going to get there. And that's the fun part. That's the thrill when you're just taking dictation from the muse and it just flows. It's a wonderful feeling.
That's awesome to hear about, and I don't think it's been said on our program before that you can just have fun with it and craft it. Just craft it, and then later you go back and look, and it doesn't have to be perfect. It can just unfold. Sometimes
I've actually surprised myself. I've gone back to things that I've written 6, 7, 8 years ago, and I look at it and go, wow, I wrote that? It's a very pleasant surprise. It's a very pleasant surprise. Yeah, and of course, some poems you craft over and over and over again. As Robert Creeley said, poems are never finished, just abandoned.
That's very true.
Which is true of stories, too. You eventually get to the point where, sure, I can improve it, but what's the point? It's
yes.
Yes. So anyway, so it's fun.
Well, thank you. I'm wondering where you'd like to move next. You've got a lot. You've got things about people, animals. You've got a longer prose article. Where would you like to go?
Well, how about the first poem I ever got published?
That's a great idea.
This is a funny story. This is actually written about a high school teacher I had. I was 15 and she was 23, and she was the old woman. But in retrospect, obviously, she was very, very young. And she quit teaching after just 1 year, went off to be a lawyer, which I thought was terrible because she was so excited about poetry and literature and everything. And this was, it's called Eternal Youth. Though summer now long here, the cherry blossom lingers on and blushes in the innocence of childhood, a mischievous gleam from an eye of wisdom, eternal youth.
Oh, that's lovely. That's so succinct, almost like a haiku.
It was sort of like a haiku. I consider, there's all sorts of shades of anywhere from, a great novel being the equivalent of a great master oil painting, all the way down to a haiku being just a little, squiggle of a crayon or something. And there's the range all the way in between. So this was a little squiggle that I thought captured her essence. And
it beautifully captures. Read it once more because I want to hear those last lines.
Although summer now long here, the cherry blossom lingers on and blushes in the innocence of childhood, a mischievous gleam from an eye of wisdom, eternal youth.
That is eternal youth. A mischievous gleam from an eye of wisdom.
I know that one by heart. I don't even need to read it.
So beautifully captured. I'm delighted that our audience is getting from you a sense of being unlimited in where you can go with writing, because you've got this small haiku-like verse, you've got the longer prose, you've got articles, you've got books. You're telling us we can be unlimited in our creativity and how we approach writing.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
absolutely.
Wonderful.
Yeah, like I said, you don't know where they're going to turn. This next one that I know you want me to read is, I grew up around New York City, and I was a Mets fan, not a Yankees fan. And I walked through the Bowery, which doesn't even exist anymore. It was a section of town where all the bums hung out. And
I've heard of the Bowery.
The place rather had an odor about it. But it was an interesting place. For me, places like that have more life than the sanitized malls of suburbia.
It's more food for the writer.
Yeah, exactly. This one I know by heart too. This is called The Derelict. He goes, the wind blows strong, but it's not warm, and the stormy sea is sway. Alone she lies beneath the skies and beneath the stormy main. The crew of hers so much deserve, so much for their desires, for the sea is cold and the waves are bold, and her captain now retired. But in her home port no news is sought, and her home may rot forever. But somewhere now, I don't know how, they'll hear of her sunken treasure.
Oh, wow.
A friend of mine actually set that to music. It was kind of cool.
I wish we had an audience. I mean, we have you, and I wish we had a live audience to appreciate this amazing.
It's fun.
Amazing picture of her sunken treasure. Wow. That's great.
Yeah. All those people, they're all, some may not even have families that know where they are or whatever.
They've got incredible stories.
Yeah, they all have, exactly.
They have treasures.
Yeah, great fodder for writers, exactly.
Well, I'll leave it up to you where you'd like to go next.
Oh, well, okay. Totally the opposite direction.
Okay.
This is a poem I wrote about my dog, who unfortunately died last year.
Oh.
But he was a wonderful little puppy, and he was a house puppy. He didn't like going out. In fact, he slept more than any animal I've ever known in my entire life. But he was always very careful. Wherever I went, he went with me.
Oh.
This is a most concerned companion. Off in the corner, he snores. I get up. He hears me, still snoring. A twitch of an ear, aimed at the squeak in my chair, moving as I do, following me. I round the corner of the couch. Another muscle twitches. One eye opened, half. To the kitchen. No cause for alarm. Ear still cocked. A droopy eye closes. I return. He is snoring again.
I'm sure a lot of dog lovers out there are going to appreciate that.
He's waking up in the middle of the night. He'd sleep on our bed and he made a racket.
And he knew exactly where you were at all times.
Absolutely.
That's
Absolutely.
why he's a concerned companion.
When I wasn't there, he'd sit on my chair, look out the window.
You must miss him.
Oh, I do. I do.
I'm glad you've immortalized him in a poem.
Absolutely. I tend to immortalize people I know.
So, what have you got next?
Well, I'm going to run out of stuff if you make me read one after another, but I'll keep doing that.
Oh, I don't think you'll run out. I saw some pretty long pieces in there that we can
Tell you what,
to.
let's, here's an interesting one. This, I wrote a whole series of these about 10 years ago. They were called Songs of the Apocalypse. Just all sorts of things about, basically came from watching the news.
Oh yeah, that's apocalyptic.
The world is going to end if you listen to the news, and it's going to end tomorrow.
Yes.
It never does.
And it has been ending for quite a few years.
Exactly. So this is one of them. It's called Songs of the Apocalypse. Moon about half, blessed with a halo on a midsummer's eve. Summer morn hot with dew, yet clouds far distant rising. Rising, rising, threatening rising. Tomorrow the rains will come. They say there won't be severe flooding. Why did they say that? They say that the world won't come to an end, and next winter the flowers will bloom. They keep saying that, and I don't know why.
Surprise, surprise.
Exactly. It's like trying to make sense out of the news every night. You feel compelled to do it, but it doesn't make any sense.
Now, how long ago did you say you wrote that poem?
Oh, that was at least 10, 15 years ago.
It's appropriate today.
And I did a whole series. I had 20 or 30 of them, but that was the only one that's always struck me as sort of encapsulating all those poems. Because basically they were all the same. At the time I thought they were all different, but they weren't.
Well, yeah, and disasters do happen and the world goes on.
Exactly. Right.
Now, I don't want to leave this show without talking about rants.
Okay.
Because you have introduced me to the rant and I love it. So I want you to tell the audience first of all, what is a rant? Because I couldn't find it in any of my books.
Well, it's a new form of poetry, and the best description of it is a breathless explosion of emotion. A breathless explosion of emotion. You basically take a poem that can be read as a single sentence almost, and put power to it. Now, you're better at reading rants than I am. I'm terrible at reading my own. Yes, you are. I'm terrible at reading my own rants.
Maybe it's because I'm female.
Well, I don't know. Maybe you got bigger lungs so you can do it better.
I actually fell in love with the form, so maybe it's me. Who knows? I'm a ranter.
Tell you what I'll do. I'll read one and have you read the other. How's that?
Super. That's a deal.
Okay.
What's your first one called?
I'll do Now.
Oh, I like that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is Now. Got to take a deep breath before I do this.
Okay.
We live and love in the present, now, that sharp point at the tip of the arrow of time, whose shaft defines all that we know is human from the first hint of Genesis to us. Now is always now, but like a fireworks stage falling away at apogee, will not always be here now. You, me, are no longer at that sharp focus defined by now. But we are still here now, still at the tip, but we lean backward now into the gale, hoping not to be swept away. Our eyes focus on the shaft of time. We see our own birth and the two markers that mark and define another's soul. We measure ourselves by those markers, by those once but no longer here with us now. We know that there were men in the age of giants, and that giants call themselves men among giants. Ra held the sun because man said so, and a blind bard told us a story to which all others are measured. We measure ourselves by these giants and ask ourselves if we too are giants, or have the fates, the muse, and the graces conspired to keep us mortal. And if mortal, was it worth the pain and torment to be here now, to stay here now? As if we have a choice.
Wow. Wow, I hope you guys loved that as much as I did.
I stumbled on it a few times.
There's so much in it. I mean, I think that's what I like. There's so much in it, and I'd like to hear it 10 times. You know, we don't have time to read it 10 times, but this is a good time to tell our audience.
By the 10th time, I might be able to do it without stumbling.
This is a good time to tell our audience that next month we're going to have a poetry slam.
This should be fun.
That Steve is going to help us orchestrate that, and we're going to bring in some of the bagel bards, and maybe we'll have quite a bit of ranting and raving and reading.
It's some good experimental poetry, which should be fun.
Yeah.
So this one I want you to read because
Okay.
you did a very good job with it.
Okay. Oh, I like this one. I Must Live is the title. I think these are brilliant, Steve. I must live. I, as a botanist, wonder, perched alone against a rocky crag whose life hangs by the thinnest filament of root, the delicate balance of nature determined by the fates to tip one way or the other at some near or far distant time, whose life supported by freshly melted mountain snow and by minerals transported from within solid rock, to tender roots whose life-seeking tentacles reach further within mountains so permanent and cling still harder to life so rare, to prepare a blossom whose only duty to raise to seed that small bud of life deep within its pistil and throw to air so thin its seed of life. For his must a mountain crumble and a small blossom die when her seed is sown. I must live. Woo! Love it.
You did that well.
Oh, I love the words and the explosion of words. I hope you all enjoyed that too. And again, Steve has such a range that this is an invitation for all of us to be unlimited in how we write, what we write about, the style, the form. And it seems like you have a lot to teach us. Maybe we can have you back to do some plain teaching sometime.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah. So where do we go next, Steve?
Oh, okay. How about something recent and long?
Great. Yeah. How recent is this?
It's actually about a month ago.
Oh, okay.
Which you'll recognize it, and or you recognize the period.
Oh, okay. I did know you a month ago.
Right. So what can I say about this? This is one of those things where I just sat down and started writing, and I didn't know where it was going. Mm-hmm. And you probably noticed that.
Did the muse come to you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just started, there was a little patch of ice at the back of my, little patch of snow in the back of my yard, and it was shaded, and everything else, crocuses were coming up, but there was still that little patch of snow in the backyard, and that's interesting. And what I noticed about myself was, so long as that patch of snow was there, I considered it was still winter and I wouldn't go out in my backyard.
It's a good measure.
And that was the genesis of this. So I'll read this.
See, notice how I'm sorry, keep interrupting you. A writer observes the small patch of snow.
Right.
And it's a marker of sorts.
Right. So it's the definition of winter still.
Yeah.
And even though it was officially spring. In fact, it was officially May. Anyway, it's titled The Last Patch of Ice in the Spring. It's spring, but the color of life is brown. The robins have been here for a month or more, but their dance is over. I have seen robins and wrens in flight with bits of grass, sure signs of homemaking in progress. So it is spring. But in a far corner of my yard, the last patch of ice lingers, shrinking. A week ago, it came to my back door. I would never think to violate its pureness, so I trap myself in winter-bound cottage, longing for spring, true spring. I can escape to the backyard now, but I resist the temptation, while the glacier yet stands. Silly habit. The ground an inch below the muddy swamp of spring remains firm and solid, the field mouse asleep in its burrow. To the worms and bugs and field mice, winter lingers. To halt the northerly progress of nature's tourists. The pair of robins, I don't know the boy from the girl, prance and peck at the earth, but the worm, succulent morsel, remains frozen, imprisoned, still safe by winter's grasp. And so the migrants hold back. Honking geese who never left are angry. No fresh shoots of green, no savory salad served fresh from the farm, yard, or golf course. Only brown, withered stalks of last year's bounty, made dry as tinder by the winter's gale, straw for another's house. It is time to throw open the door to the backyard. I slip on my mucking boots and parade the perimeter of the estate. When I was a child on a much larger estate, I knew every inch, every rock, every perennial, every lair. A tree had fallen, probably before I was born, blocking a small stream, crossing at a gap in an old stone wall. The pond behind the dam was full of life. Skunk cabbage announced the true beginning of spring. Skunk cabbage, the first green explosion, reaching for the sky before a canopy of oak and maple placed dark shadows on a wet primeval scum pond. The pond with its log dam became an explosion of life. I knew every inch of its periphery, having only ventured once barefooted into the muck up to my knees and sinking. There were minnows and pollywogs there. A situation requiring my mother and a hastily broken green sapling. Mortification for a little boy. I would sit on that log for hours, for years. When I left, the log had split from its use as a bridge, and the water had begun to flow more freely. Some neighborhood kid, I was no longer a kid, but a dispassionate and clean observer now, had attempted to rebuild the dam with stones and twigs, a childhood beaver. But even that valiant effort gave way at last, and when at last I looked, I have no reason to look again. I have no stream, no waterworks on this estate, and no time to learn each rock and lair. A line of overgrown pine make a fuzzy line to the south. A rickety waving fence almost marks the northern boundary, except that it crosses the line at an angle. The west by a stone embankment, the east by a road and Bumblebee Park beyond. What is now my backyard was once a large brick stable, burned to the ground at the turn of the last century. My house and my neighbors were built from the rubble, and its stone foundation still defines the only feature in an otherwise unremarkable yard. Rubble from that inferno lies inches below the ground, and voids constructed from falling timbers, stone and brick make homes for chipmunks, groundhogs, and other assorted and as yet unidentified rodents still asleep. Upon that bed of rubble I built my garden. 16 8-inch by 8 feet board and 3 tons of topsoil gave birth to Bumblebee Farm. I imagine rows of red ripened tomatoes, but it's way too early, and a robin pounds at a still frozen earth.
It's such a wonderful narrative, and so much encapsulates how humans feel about a late coming spring. Yes. Via the animals and all the creatures of the earth. There's so much in there, Steve, that I would love to hear it a second time, but unfortunately
we don't have time, right?
We're going to run out of time, and I know there was something that you really wanted to finish with, so right. I'm going to place hold looking more closely at that piece because it has so much in it, but I thank you. It's absolutely
Sure.
wonderful.
Well, for me it was the conflict or the dichotomy between the house I grew up in, where I was a little kid and had time to explore, and where I live now, where I really don't have time to
Yes.
explore even my little tiny yard.
Yes.
Anyway, the poem that you want me to read, this is about an old friend of mine, Don O'Brien. I knew him for a good 20 years, and for about 15 years we never missed a Patriots football game together. Anyway, he died a couple of years ago. This is the last view of mortal man for Don O'Brien. Wishing for end to come swiftly, but it lingers for 2 years more. Abandonment of the spirit, please, but the soul lingers against the will. Give up, give it all up. Perversity of nature, fight on and on and on. I sit next to him, watching football, as we have for years and years, and I cry, "What a bad call!" I see a smile, I think, but he is unresponsive. His children unresponsive, his wife dead. We sit alone now, just the two of us. Friends unwilling to see a dying man, he unwilling to be seen dying. What he had is gone, mostly. What he has left are memories, recorded in a book, his only possession. Port to port, the story of a young man's journey into manhood. Port to port, the story of a warship clearing for action. Port to port, the memory of those who returned. For years we were best buddies, tied together by the sea, the sea, the sea. He the chief, I the collector of stories. He sank a camel in the Suez Canal. The United States Navy paused briefly on the way to save the world, Korea, Indochina. At the helm of a great ship, in the face of a typhoon, even the admiral was sick. Military paradise, a 45 on your belt, a 16-inch gun at your back, and an angry Turkish soldier with bayonet fixed at your side. First class, chief, master chief petty officer, principal character in this poem. You rise to the ranks as you fail. I stare out the window, as he has these many days, fixed prison of your last view as a mortal man. We shared a beer at Thanksgiving. We shared a beer. I drank it at Christmas. I drank to your health on New Year's Eve. I'm sorry he's not here now, they said without emotion. Call the family, he said. We buried him on Tuesday, next to his wife, she said. Was there a service, I asked? No, she said, and hung up.
Oh, that was a very moving.
I didn't like his in-laws.
I don't blame you. Stephen, I'm glad that you got in that tribute to your friend, and I want to thank you again for coming. It was so wonderful to have you on. I hope you'll come back, because I feel like there's a lot that you have to teach us.
I got a whole pile of them.
And a lot more that Steve has to read. So we'll see you next month at our Poetry Slam. Please tune in.
Right,
Thank you.